Hello, back again. Some more voiceover duels for you today. So, hopefully, trying to use this video to explain a little bit about my approach to the game and how I have kind of played this game for a while now. I guess to begin with, first thing I'm looking at in these fights is matchup, you know. My hero versus their hero. What are their kind of plays? What are the counter plays? What is their strongest mix-up? What's my strongest mix-up? Try and get an understanding of the actual character before I'm starting to get an understanding of the player themselves. But of course, it is not just hero versus hero. You know, it's player versus player. That's way more important. A good player can dominate with a bad hero, and a bad player can suck with a great hero. So none of it matters until you are kind of getting a read on the player. In terms of learning to read the player themselves, you know, before you even really start fighting, you can start kind of making those kind of small kind of details that you're noticing. You know, are they favouring a guard side? Are they going into their best mix-ups out of range? Do they seem comfortable with the character? You know, how much time do they have on the character? Not that time necessarily dictates whether a player is good or not, but you know, you can generally expect that a player that's got 90 reps on a hero has a pretty good understanding, especially compared to someone that might just have one or two. But that's definitely not always the case, so you can't take that as a guarantee. Pattern recognition. So one of the most important things in front is after you have, you know, spent a little bit of time fighting your opponent, you start to understand what kind of moves they're doing. Are they committing to heavies? Are they favouring one mix-up? Are they feint heavy? You know, if the hero has a crushing counter, are they using that a lot? As soon as you develop the ability to really start to recognise those patterns quickly, you will become such a better player. No matter what you can do, you might have crazy reactions, you might, you know, be an absolute god reaction monster, but if you cannot make reads, it doesn't matter. So things like conditioning. So conditioning is super important in Front. You really want to use this to dictate the fight. You know, if you have feinted all of your unblockables for an entire round, that person is starting to be conditioned into thinking that, you know, you are way more feint happy than you're willing to commit. So they might start just ignoring that, they might start light interrupting, and if that is the case and you've conditioned them well enough, when you do just start dropping those attacks, it's going to be unexpected. You know, it's going to be conditioned free damage that now all of a sudden you're committing, your opponent is no longer sure of what your patterns are, and you then just mix up from there. You know, commit, feint to GB, whatever the case may be. Just try and use that to get a good read on your opponent. So, part of getting a read on your opponent, you need to understand if they are aggressive or a passive player. You know, are they someone that's very confident in their neutral? They're very confident in their defense. They can react to those attacks. They can make good reads. Are they a lot more willing to sit in that neutral stance, or are they all out of pressure? You know, maybe they're not the most confident in their defense. They rely heavily on just using that overwhelming pressure of mix-up constantly. And, you know, against a lot of players that will work. A lot of players are more offense-based than defense. You know, back, you know, quite a few years ago, there was very much total meta in the game. The Ubisoft devs have done a pretty good job of making this more offense focused. Now, that's not to say that defense isn't very strong, but it's just that with the amount of mix-ups in the game now that are truly unreactable, it really does favour an aggressive player more. So, another thing that's kind of often overlooked is stamina. You know, I think it's safe to say that everyone's thrown fights before because they've not kept a good enough eye on their stamina, and now all of a sudden you're out of stam and you're facing all the pressure, you're losing a whole bunch of health. Before you know it, you're dead before your stam's even come back. Being able to manage that stamina effectively is really going to help you to win. The more you're kind of throwing yourself out of stamina, the less you are able to apply the pressure yourself. So I think it's just one of those obvious things that maybe isn't looked at enough. Stamina management will really help you in your fights. So spacing is huge, and it's matchup dependent, it's hero dependent, and it's player dependent. If you are playing someone that has a lot of pressure but small range, you know, for example, like Berserker, you are going to need to try and keep in front of them. You don't want them controlling the spacing, you want to be up on them and just applying that pressure constantly. If your opponent can't handle a lot of high pressure, their defense isn't the best, again, you know you want to be pressuring them all the time. And if your opponent has a really good defense, they're making excellent reads, they're reacting to everything, then you're going to want to slow down a little bit, and you're going to want to try and get yourself some openings with your own defense, as well as getting into your strongest mix-ups. Just to use this fight as an example, so I'm using Zerk, who has very limited range, versus a Zhang who definitely has a lot more range than Zerk. I'm going to want to try and keep up close. I am pretty confident in my defense, but you know, you can't just sit there and make 100 correct reads and win by never going into any kind of pressure. You are definitely going to want to play to your character's strengths, whether that be controlling the range, whether that be being up close. You know, if you're a Nobu main, then you know that you're really going to want to be staying out of most of your opponent's ranges because you've got, you know, such good range yourself. I think it all just comes with hero knowledge. You know, the more you play the game, the more heroes you play, the more you're going to understand how to use that effectively. So depending on how good you are at this game and how good your reactions are, you can start to do something called differing, which is, you know, having the ability to look at what's a feint, what's committed, what's a light versus what's a heavy. And those are the kind of things that will really, you know, if you've got a player that can do that, you're going to have a really tough time. You're going to need to play mostly in your completely unreactable mix-ups. You know, for example, that will be Afera's neutral feintable dash. That will be things like 400 MS dodge forward bashes, you know, get into the mind game of whether that's going to be committed, whether it's going to be feinted, whether you're going to dodge forward to GB. Just anything that you can use that is unreactable at near enough all levels will give, you know, even the most react gods in the game a tougher time. But if you sit there and you just throw a bunch of 500 MS lights and predictable patterns, you are going to lose and it's going to be bad and you're not going to have a good time. So momentum, this game can be all about momentum sometimes. You know, if you've done a bunch of damage to your opponent early on, then they are definitely now on the back foot. You've got all the pressure, you've got all the confidence, and they will naturally adjust their playstyle to be more defensive, which only allows you to get more offensive and just absolutely apply all of the pressure to carry on and win the round. However, a momentum shift can occur just as easy. You know, a couple of good reads, a couple of good parries, get your own damage down, and all of a sudden the opponent swings in your opponent's favour. All of a sudden your opponents have got all the momentum themselves. You know, all of a sudden you're on the back foot, you're having to adjust how you're playing, and you know, it's much easier to keep that momentum than it is to get it back. So something that I don't think is talked about enough in this game is rhythm. So it all kind of ties into muscle memory. A lot of players have a rhythm or a timing to their attacks. So, if you're fighting someone a couple rounds in and you understand that they sit in neutral for a few seconds and then they like to start with something like a heavy or, a light, something that's maybe not the best mix up, but is just something that is their opener consistently, then once you've started to recognize that, you can really use it against them. If you know, for example, that your opponent waits 4 seconds before throwing an attack, then why not wait 3.5 seconds and throw a GB and get them in their heavy start? Or, wait the 4 seconds, get a neutral light parry, and then get started with your own offense. Timing and rhythm is not just how they open, but it can be how they like to use their mix-ups. For example, if you are Zerk and your opponent is Zerk and you are learning that they are using loads of heavy faint light mix-ups and they start to have a pattern or a rhythm to when they do it, definitely, again, this is something you learn, you take advantage of. If they routinely feint right heavily into top light, go for the predict top light parry. The worst is that you'll not hit the parry, they land a 9 damage light attack on you, you move forward. Obviously, don't go for these things all the time, you have to keep it switched up and have the ability to mix up constantly, because if they know that all of a sudden you're going for heavy faint light parries and they start GBing, that's a lot more damage. But it's all about keeping things from forming a pattern while trying to recognize your opponent's patterns as much as possible. Are they someone who will light interrupt everything because they're not confident in their defense? That's an easy punish. Parry it, deflect it, it's a lot of damage, it's easy to see, and hopefully it stops them from doing it as much, allowing you to go back into your actual chain pressure. But yeah, rhythm is huge. The amount of people that I've kind of played with in Discord that have come from YouTube and said, I really want to fight you, and then they've asked afterwards, what did you think? It's one of the easiest things to talk about is rhythm. Just don't keep it the same, switch it up, and try and spot it in your opponents, and it's a really easy, quick thing to learn. So, frame advantage is something that is often spoken about, but I'm not sure that many people have a great understanding of it. It's not just recovery and when you're in frame plus versus when they are. It's knowing when to attack, but also when to defend, when you should be looking out for your opponent to kind of be playing defense. If your opponent is not someone that has much understanding of frame advantage, you really are then going to want to be using that to your advantage, because they might not realize that they should be playing defense right now, and they're throwing out attacks and you're getting free light interrupts, or you're getting free GBs, free parries, whatever the case may be, and vice versa. They might not realize that they're in frame plus, and then that's easy for you to just completely get out of that situation where they should be applying pressure, and you don't have to worry about making the correct reads or making the correct reacts. It's definitely one of those things that starts to become a bit of a separation between good and bad players. Bad players will not generally have much of an understanding of when they should be attacking versus when they should be playing defense. It's not exclusively a bad player thing. It can happen to anyone. Sometimes you're so kind of locked in at the moment that you're not really paying attention to all the little things. But you will know that if you watch any of the competitive players, you know, Blitz is a great player. He kind of has awareness of these things all the time. You know, there's not going to be a time where he doesn't know when he is frame advantage, frame disadvantage. The sooner you kind of learn that correctly, the easier it's going to be for you knowing when you should be attacking versus when you're confused because it feels like none of your attacks are landing and you're getting interrupted all the time. It's just another kind of thing to pick up on, but it will take a bit longer in my opinion. It's not just common knowledge. So for a player like me, you know, I'm not, I've always said in my comments, I'm not trying to be this super optimal player. You know, depending on the level of my opponent, you know, I'll become more optimal, maybe using more parries than deflects and more kind of the safe mix-ups. Just because obviously, you know, you want to win, and if you know your opponent's good, then you want to win using the best tools available to you. But you know, if I'm going up against someone that's giving me a whole bunch of light attacks, like I'm farming them deflects, dudes. I'm not trying to play optimally. I'm not trying to sweat my absolute face off. I'm just here for some deflects, dude. It's the most fun aspect of the game to me. So you know, if someone's giving you an opportunity to get a bunch of them, that's a better day to me than just playing optimally and going for those tactical ganks and going for those nothing but insane mix-up fights. You know, that stuff kind of gets old to me. So, just touching up on pattern recognition again. The game doesn't have the biggest player base, you know. There's a good chance that you're going to run into similar players in duels quite consistently. Which is the case, which if it is the case, then you might recognise that, you know, opponent Y is super commit happy, you know, super wanting to commit to all of his attacks. He doesn't feint much, you know, he doesn't use his best mix-ups, and you know before you even got into that fight that that's, you know, an edge that you can use. But opponent Y might say, you know, he might be super optimal, only using the strongest mix-ups. You know, it's Highlander 400 MS lights, it's feintable neutral bashes, it's unblockables, and you know when you fight them that you really are going to have to be on the lookout for making those good reads, because without them the chances are you're not going to win. But yeah, just you know, recognize names, recognize players. You will run into players that you've met before. It's not even a question of will you, it's just a question of when. I think I have kind of started playing the ones game mode, the dual game modes, more in the past couple of weeks than I have for a few years, just because it's a nice break from that 4v4 game mode. But yeah, well, I've just kind of yapped on for a while here. Hopefully talked about some good points, maybe some stuff you didn't know, maybe some stuff you did know, maybe you just turn the volume off and watch the game, who knows. Either way, I hope you enjoyed. If there's anything you guys feel I haven't touched on or you want to, you know, make me aware of, please drop it in the comments. I always love learning new things about the game. I'm just going to let this fight play out for you guys. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll catch you in the next one.
Victory! Round 3.